How can a ruthless hunter, who set an entire forest on fire for the mere pleasure of the hunt, transform into one of the most venerated saints of the Catholic Church? The story of Saint Conrado of Piacenza reveals how divine grace can transform even the most impetuous heart into an example of virtue and holiness, showing us that the way to God is open to all who dare to respond to his call. Chapter 1. The Young Noble. The story begins in the prosperous city of Piacenza, where young Conrado was born into a noble family, surrounded by privileges and comforts that marked his early years. The halls of the family palace echoed with the clashing of swords and tales of hunters, fueling in him an unbridled passion for adventure and the hunt. During his youth, Conrado excelled in the noble tournaments, where his skill with the sword and his daring in battle earned him considerable renown among his peers. His athletic figure, mounted on a war steed, was admired by many and feared by others, while his indomitable spirit drove him to constantly seek new thrills and challenges. Between battles, he found his greatest pleasure in the hunts he organized in the nearby forests. The pursuit of boars and hares became his obsession, and no weather or circumstance could stop him from satisfying his passion for hunting. The local peasants learned to recognize his silhouette at dawn as he set out with his dogs and servants in search of new prey. His marriage to the noble Euphrosyna, far from tempering his adventurous spirit, seemed only to stoke his desire to demonstrate his bravery and hunting prowess even more. His married life passed between the obligations of court and his frequent hunting expeditions, with nothing seeming to change the course of his life devoted to worldly pleasures. Despite his apparent happiness and success in courtly life, something was missing in Conrado's heart. An inexplicable restlessness accompanied him during his nights of rest, as if an inner voice were warning him that his true destiny was very different from the life he was leading. However, it would take a dramatic event to awaken him to this reality he could not yet understand. Chapter 2. The Fire of Transformation. It was a cold autumn morning when Conrado organized one of his usual hare hunts. The fields gilded by the season, and the fresh air promised a perfect day for the pursuit. However, that day would be remembered not for the success of the hunt, but for an impulsive decision that would change the course of his life forever. Frustrated by the difficulty of cornering his prey in the thick forest, Conrado made a fateful decision. Without measuring the consequences of his actions, he ordered his servants to set fire to a section of the forest in order to force the hares out of their hiding places. The wind, a treacherous ally of tragedy, began to blow with unexpected force, spreading the flames far beyond what had been planned. Within hours, the fire had turned into an uncontrollable monster that devoured not only the forest, but also the neighboring cultivated fields. The peasants, desperate, watched as their crops, the only means of sustenance for the coming winter, turned to ashes before their eyes. Their cries of anguish mingled with the crackling of flames that consumed months of labor and hope. The governor of Piacenza, alerted by the magnitude of the disaster, ordered an immediate investigation to find the culprit. The anger of the peasants demanded justice, and the authorities, under pressure from public outcry, soon pointed to a poor peasant who had been seen near the forest on that fateful morning. Lacking sufficient evidence but needing someone to blame, the innocent man was sentenced to death. The news of this unjust sentence reached Conrado's ears, and for the first time in his life, he faced the true weight of his actions. That night, as he contemplated the last embers of the fire he had set, a profound transformation began to take root within him. The fire that had destroyed the forest was also burning away his old life, preparing the ground for a radical change that no one could have foreseen. Chapter 3. The Redeeming Confession. The morning after the fire, while the entire city was discussing the imminent execution of the supposed culprit, Conrado experienced an inner battle like never before. For the first time in his life, the weight of his conscience overpowered his noble pride. The images of the burning forest and the face of the innocent condemned man haunted him relentlessly. In an act that surprised the entire court of Piacenza, Conrado presented himself before the governor. Silence fell over the room when, in a firm yet humble voice, he confessed to being the true culprit behind the fire that had devastated the fields and the forest. Those present, accustomed to seeing in him the proud, noble hunter, now beheld a man transformed by remorse and truth. The governor, though impressed by Conrado's honesty, could not ignore the gravity of the crime. Justice demanded compensation for the peasants who had lost their crops. Without hesitation, Conrado offered to sell all his possessions to repair the damage caused. This decision, which would lead him to material poverty, marked the beginning of his true spiritual wealth. The news of his confession and subsequent renunciation of his riches spread quickly throughout the region. Many could not understand how a noble of his standing had chosen voluntary poverty as an act of justice. Yet in Conrado's heart, each coin given to the affected peasants was a step further toward his inner liberation. Conrado's confession not only saved an innocent life, it also revealed a deeper truth about his own nature. That capacity to acknowledge his mistakes and accept the consequences, even at the cost of his social position and wealth, demonstrated that beneath the surface of the impetuous hunter beat the heart of a true servant of God. Chapter 4. The Path to Poverty. Stripped of his material possessions, Conrado discovered that true freedom began where attachment to worldly goods ended. The halls he once frequented were replaced by the streets of the city, where every step brought him closer to a new understanding of life and the purpose of his existence. The transition from abundance to poverty, far from plunging him into despair, awakened in him a joy previously unknown. The looks of pity or scorn from his former hunting companions did nothing to shake his determination. For the first time in his life, he experienced the peace that comes from living in harmony with the truth of one's heart. His days began to fill with small acts of service toward those he had once barely noticed. The very peasants who had suffered from his recklessness now witnessed his transformation, seeing in the once proud noble a humble servant of the needy. The news of his radical change reached the local Franciscans, who recognized in his story echoes of the conversion of their founder, Saint Francis of Assisi. Just as Francis had renounced his life of privilege to follow Christ, Conrado discovered that his true vocation lay in the path of evangelical poverty. Amid this process of detachment, Conrado found unexpected support in his wife Eufrosina. Far from opposing his new way of life, she herself began to feel a similar call to religious life, as if her husband's transformation had awakened a dormant vocation within her. Chapter 5. The Shared Vocation. In the quiet of their now unadorned home, Conrado and Eufrosina had a conversation that would change the course of their lives forever. Words flowed with a sincerity never before experienced in their marriage, as they shared their deepest desires to follow the divine call they both increasingly felt. Eufrosina, inspired by her husband's transformation and driven by her own spiritual quest, expressed her desire to join the Order of the Poor Clares. Her eyes shone with the same determination that Conrado had shown in his conversion. The love that united them now took on a new dimension in the religious vocation they shared. The decision to separate in order to follow their respective religious paths, though painful on a human level, was imbued with a supernatural joy. Conrado saw in Eufrosina's vocation to the Poor Clares yet another sign of divine providence, not only calling him, but also touching the heart of his beloved wife. Their separation was carried out with the blessing of the Church, which recognized in both the authenticity of their call. Eufrosina entered the convent of St. Clare, where her noble heart would find a new channel in contemplative life. Meanwhile, Conrado prepared to embrace the Franciscan way within the Third Order, retaining the freedom to wander as the Spirit guided him. The city of Piacenza witnessed this extraordinary story of love transformed into a religious vocation. The couple, once shining in the noble halls, now illuminated the path to holiness by their example, demonstrating that true love can rise above the earthly to find its fulfillment in God. Chapter 6. The tireless pilgrim, freed from worldly attachments and with a heart burning with love for Christ, Conrado began his life as a Franciscan pilgrim. The pilgrim's staff replaced the sword he once proudly carried, and his feet, once accustomed only to the soft floors of palaces, now became used to the rugged paths of pilgrimage. The roads of Italy became his home as he traveled from one sanctuary to another. Every step was a prayer, every encounter an opportunity to serve. The renown of his conversion preceded him in many places, but Conrado sought not the admiration of men, but intimacy with God in the solitude of the journey. His pilgrimage led him southward, through hamlets and towns, where his presence left a trail of hope and conversion. Those who knew him from his former life could scarcely believe the transformation they witnessed. The proud hunter had become a humble pilgrim who shared with all the bread of charity he received. Upon reaching the Strait of Messina, Conrado felt that the Spirit was guiding him towards Sicily. The island, with its rugged lands and deep religiosity, seemed to call him with an inner voice that could not be ignored. The sea that separated the peninsula from the island became a new threshold on his path to holiness. The journey to Sicily marked a turning point in his pilgrimage. It was no longer just a physical journey, but a deeper plunge into the mystery of his vocation. Chapter 7. Life in Sicily. The arid lands between Catania and Syracuse welcomed Conrado as one more child of their austere landscape. The relentless sun that had weathered the faces of so many Sicilian peasants also began to sculpt the features of the pilgrim, erasing the last traces of his former noble life. As he traveled across the island, Conrado found his first respite in Avola during his pilgrimage. The small town, with its peaceful pace and simple people, offered him a space to deepen his prayer life. However, the spirit that guided him whispered that this would not be his final destination. His path then led him to Noto, where Providence seemed to have prepared a special place for him. Near the Church of St. Michael, a small cell became his dwelling. The simplicity of the space contrasted with the grand halls of his past. But for Conrado, it was a palace where he could meet his king. The inhabitants of Noto soon began to notice the presence of this strange pilgrim from the mainland. His life of prayer and penance, coupled with a gentle demeanor born of deep inner peace, began to attract those seeking spiritual counsel and comfort. The renown of his sanctity, which he never sought, gradually spread throughout the region. What had begun as a silent retreat was slowly transforming into a beacon for those seeking God, compelling Conrado to seek a new refuge in order to preserve his desire for solitude. Chapter 8. The Hermit of Noto. In his quest for greater solitude, Conrado discovered the Pizzoni's grotto, located on the outskirts of Noto. This natural space, removed from the bustle of the city, seemed to have been waiting for him all along. The rocky walls of the grotto became the confines of his new home, where he could fully live out his eremitic vocation. Life in the grotto was austere, but fulfilling. Hours were divided between long periods of prayer, the contemplation of the surrounding nature, and the manual work necessary for his sustenance. The birds, which once fled from the arrows of the hunter, now approached him with trust to share his prayer space. The transformation from the former hunter to a hermit was complete. The grotto, which the locals began to call the Grotto of Saint Conrado, became a living symbol of how God can transform any life when he is allowed to act. Although the people of the area respected his desire for solitude, they could not help but be drawn to the peace emanating from that sacred place. In the solitude of his grotto, Conrado developed a deep life of prayer and penance. The long hours of contemplation forged in him a wisdom that did not come from books, but from intimate communion with God. His heart, once occupied by the passion for hunting, now beat to the rhythm of a different pursuit, the ceaseless search for God. Though he longed for isolation, Conrado understood that his hermitic vocation did not mean complete withdrawal from his brothers. Thus, he established a delicate balance between his solitary life and welcoming those who, moved by grace, sought his counsel and prayers. Chapter 9. The Servant of the Sick. Every Friday, like a sacred ritual, Conrado descended from his grotto to visit the sick at Noto's hospital. This gesture, born from his profound understanding of human suffering, revealed that his quest for solitude was not an escape from the world, but rather a source of strength for serving others. At the hospital, his calloused hands, tempered by work and penance, transformed into instruments of comfort. The sick eagerly awaited his visit, not only for the physical relief his presence seemed to bring, but also for the spiritual peace emanating from his words and gestures. Conrado had learned that in the face of every ailing person, the face of the suffering Christ was reflected. After caring for the sick, Conrado devoted long hours to prayer before the famous crucifix in the cathedral. In these moments of intimate communion with the crucified Lord, his own life of penance took on an even deeper meaning. The image of the Franciscan hermit adoring Jesus on the cross would become one of the most popular and beloved representations of the saint. The people of Noto witnessed how this man, who had renounced everything for Christ, received in return the gift of miracles. Many of the sick experienced improvements after his visits and prayers, although Conrado, in his humility, always attributed these healings to God's mercy and the faith of the patients. His ministry among the sick revealed a special facet of his charisma, the ability to unite contemplative life with active charity. In this balance, Conrado found the fullness of his vocation, demonstrating that true sanctity does not consist in withdrawing from the world, but in transforming it from the heart of God. Chapter 10. The Gift of Miracles. The fame of Conrado's holiness spread throughout Sicily when extraordinary gifts began to manifest through his intercession. The miracles, which he never sought or proclaimed, sprang forth as natural fruits of a life wholly devoted to God. Among the many wonders attributed to his intercession, his ability to read hearts stood out. Those who approached his grotto seeking spiritual guidance were astonished by his penetrating insight into their inner struggles. However, Conrado used this gift not to impress, but to guide souls more effectively toward God. The local people began to seek his blessing for the sick and the afflicted. The water that emerged near his grotto, blessed by his prayers, became an instrument of miraculous healing. Nonetheless, Conrado insisted that true healing came from faith in Christ and a conversion of the heart. The animals of the forest, especially the birds, showed extraordinary trust in his presence. This communion with nature, so characteristic of the Franciscan spirit, was seen by many as a sign of his complete reconciliation with creation, in stark contrast to his past as a hunter. Despite these extraordinary gifts, Conrado remained profoundly humble. Each miracle led him to a deeper awareness of his own smallness before God and a more radical surrender to his will. Thus, the gifts he received became instruments for the glory of God and the good of his brothers. Chapter 11. The Final Days. Conrado's final days passed in the peace of his beloved grotto in Noto, where he had found the true meaning of his existence. The winter of 1351 was particularly harsh, but the fire of divine love burning in his heart kept him warm in his humble abode. As his physical strength waned, his spirit seemed to soar with increasing intensity toward the heavenly realities. The inhabitants of Noto noticed a change during his Friday visits. His words, though fewer, carried a unique depth and gentleness, as if he were already contemplating realities that others could only glimpse. In his last weeks, Conrado intensified his prayers for the city that had welcomed him. His paternal concern for the people of Noto manifested in long hours of intercession before the crucifix that had witnessed his spiritual transformation. His final conversations with visitors were full of advice on the importance of continual conversion and love for God. On February 19, 1351, feeling that his time was near, Conrado received the last sacraments with a serenity that impressed everyone present. His final words were a prayer of thanksgiving for the mercy of God that had transformed him, from hunter to saint, from pursuer of prey to seeker of souls for Christ. The news of his death quickly spread throughout Noto and its surroundings. People gathered en masse at the grotto where the saint had spent his final years, wishing to pay homage to the one who had been, to them, a spiritual father and a living example of the transformation that God's grace can work in a soul. Chapter 12. The Legacy of Holiness. The death of Conrado marked the beginning of a new era in his influence over Noto and all of Sicily. His body was transferred with great reverence to the Church of St. Nicholas, the most beautiful in the city, where the faithful immediately began to venerate him as a saint. Testimonies of favors and miracles attributed to his intercession multiplied. People from all corners of Sicily journeyed in pilgrimage to his tomb, seeking the intercession of the one who, in life, had been such an effective channel of divine grace. The grotto, where he had lived, became a natural sanctuary, a place of pilgrimage and prayer. The example of his life continued to inspire generations of Christians. His story of radical conversion, from nobility to poverty, from pride to humility, became a powerful testimony to the transformative power of divine grace. The Franciscans, in particular, saw in him a perfect example of the charism of their order. The popular devotion to Saint Conrado grew organically, nourished by the countless favors the faithful received through his intercession. The people of Noto, who had known him in life, passed down not only the stories of his miracles, but also the example of his humility and his love for the poor and the sick. Yet his deepest legacy was not found in the miracles or his renown for holiness, but in the testimony of a life completely transformed by the love of God. The story of the hunter turned saint continues to inspire those seeking a radical change in their lives, reminding them that holiness is possible for all who respond to the divine call. Chapter 13. Perpetual Veneration. Over the centuries, the devotion to Saint Conrado has remained alive and vibrant, especially in the city of Noto. The Church of St. Nicholas, where his relics rest, has become a pilgrimage center, attracting the faithful from all over Italy and beyond its borders. The people of Noto maintain a special relationship with their patron saint. The festivities in his honor, celebrated every February 19th, gather thousands of devotees who walk the city streets in procession, recalling the path of conversion that their beloved saint walked centuries ago. Sacred art has perpetuated his memory in various forms. The most common representations show Conrado as an elderly man with a serene face, clothed in the Franciscan habit and holding a cross in his hands. The birds, often depicted perched on the cross, symbolize his reconciliation with nature, recalling his transformation from hunter to protector of creation. The Universal Church officially recognized his sanctity, confirming what the people of God had long recognized. St. Conrado became a model of conversion and penance, demonstrating that holiness is a path open even to those who seem far removed from it. Today, his figure continues to inspire those seeking a radical change in their lives. The grotto, where he spent his final years, preserved as a sanctuary, remains a place of encounter with God, where pilgrims come seeking the intercession of the one who transformed his life completely. Chapter Extra. The Hidden Signs of His Holiness. Among the many little-known aspects of St. Conrado's life, there are several events recorded by his early biographers that are rarely mentioned in traditional accounts. These events add a unique dimension to his holiness. During his years of pilgrimage, Conrado developed a special sensitivity toward injured animals. The villagers along his path recounted how the creatures of the forest, particularly wounded birds, seemed to seek him out. This ability to heal injured animals was seen as a way to atone for his past as a hunter and as a sign of his deep connection with divine creation. It is said that he had the peculiar habit of singing softly while tending to these animals, a melody some described as the echo of the angel's song. Sicilian coastal fishermen kept stories of Conrado's weather predictions. His keen observation of nature, combined with his life of prayer, allowed him to warn fishermen about impending storms with extraordinary precision. This facet of his ministry saved many lives, although he never wished for this gift to be regarded as something supernatural. In the grotto where he spent his final years, occasional visitors noted a singular phenomenon. During full moon nights, the walls of the cave seemed to emit a soft, bluish glow. This phenomenon, which some attributed to minerals in the rock and others to supernatural causes, ceased after his death. The elders of Noto passed down this story from generation to generation, interpreting it as a sign of the divine presence that accompanied the saint. There are also accounts of his special relationship with abandoned children. During his travels, he established an informal network of families who took in orphans and destitute children. This aspect of his charitable work, though less known than his healing miracles, reveals a social dimension of his holiness that transcends the purely mystical. Saint Conrado taught these adoptive families a special prayer, passed down orally and preserved to this day by some families in Noto. This prayer, different from those traditionally associated with him, emphasized the importance of seeing in every abandoned child the face of the child Jesus. It is a moving testimony to how his conversion not only led him to a contemplative life, but also to a deep concern for the most vulnerable in society. Chapter 15. Prayer to Saint Conrado. In the silence of this hour, we turn to you, Saint Conrado, witness to the transformative power of divine grace. You, who knew the weight of sin and the joy of forgiveness, intercede for us before the throne of mercy. Just as you transformed the destructive fire into a flame of divine love, help us turn our weaknesses into opportunities for grace. May your example of humility and penance inspire us always to seek the face of Christ in the solitude of prayer and in service to those in need. Teach us, Holy Pilgrim, to walk with determination along the path of holiness. May we, like you, be willing to abandon everything that prevents us from following Christ with an undivided heart. May your radical conversion be a beacon of hope for those struggling to find their way to God. Protector of the sick and comforter of the afflicted, extend your mantle of intercession over all who suffer. May your love for nature inspire us to be responsible guardians of God's creation, recognizing in it the reflection of His beauty. And at the end of our pilgrimage, when the time comes to meet the Lord, may your example encourage us to stand before Him with a heart purified by penance and aflame with divine love. Amen. Saint Conrado of Piacenza, pray for us.